Okay, awesome. So today we are with our CCSS Steering Committee, and we're going to be talking about the latest version of the CCS standard 9.0. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're really excited to talk to you about the updates that we have been working on. And by we, I mean our steering committee and the community at large for quite a while now. So we'll be talking about how we're boosting security in a number of different ways. We've got governance added, smart contracts training, but we're going to break it all down for you and show you how it strengthens the standard and the industry as a whole. I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm C4's Executive Director, and we're joined today by our amazing CCSS Steering Committee. So let's start with intros. Dirk, you are our Cryptocurrency Security Standards Steering Committee Chair. That is a mouthful, but why don't you start by just introducing yourself?
I think you just introduced me. I've been involved with C4 for quite a few years now. Used to be the chair of the Certified Bitcoin Professional Certification Committee, and still am on that committee as well. But I'm super excited to be here for our first live stream of 2025.
Awesome. Yes. Okay, let's go around. Ron, you want to jump in next?
Sure, thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Ron Stoner, head of security at Botanics Labs and a member of the CCSS committee. I also had the pleasure of architecting the first iteration of our auditor exam, and it's really great to be here with everyone today.
Thank you. Mark? You guys can call
Hi,
on each other too.
I'm Mark Christianis. I'm a CCSA, so I'm actually an auditor that audits against CCSS. I conducted the first audit with Fireblocks and also part of the CCSS Steering Committee, helping keep the standards up to date and relevant. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Jameson?
Hi, I'm Jameson Lopp, co-founder and chief security officer at Casa. I've been building high security wallets for a decade now.
Awesome. And Michael?
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Perklin. I'm the chairman of the board for C4, and I've been working in crypto security for over a decade now. I'm proud to be on the committee to help keep the CCSS standard up to date, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, all the latest changes that came out in 9.0.
Awesome. And so, yeah, Ron, you were saying you were part of the original auditor exam writing it. Michael was part of the original writing of the standard itself. So we've got some, OGs from the standard and some newbies who have helped us develop it over time. And I think one of the important things we want to make sure everyone takes away from this stream is that the CCSS has been out for over 10 years. It's been published for over 10 years. And within that time, the cryptocurrency ecosystem has drastically changed in many ways. And with that, so has the standard. And this latest iteration, which is 9.0, has a lot of exciting changes to it that we think, that the committee thinks, and the community at large is going to make a really big difference in securing cryptocurrency systems in terms of the key management piece of it. So why don't we talk a little bit about how the standard has come about and how it's community driven, and what it looks like for us to all come together and to really create this standard as a community. So it's not just a couple people sitting around writing this, it's a group of people. We take feedback from others. So why don't we look into the process a little bit? Dirk, would you be willing to get us started with this?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that a couple of key things are really important things about the CCSS is that it is an open standard. This is not a standard, being designed for profit. It's not a standard being designed by a small coalition of entities to fit what they need. Our goal, ever since Michael and the other original writers of the standard started down this path was to create something for the community, and so a large part of how the standard itself gets updated hinges on that feedback from the community as well. So again, this isn't like ISO or something where you have to pay to have a copy of it. It's openly available to anybody, and the development of it is just kind of implied an ongoing process as well. We're talking about version 9 today because it's some major changes, but it's a constantly updating standard. Yeah, maybe Mark, if you want to talk just a little bit about how you went about soliciting a lot of the stakeholder involvement and how some of that came in.
No problem. So what we did in July of 2024 is that we decided we were going to have a good overview of the standard, just have a good look at it. And we decided that, well, since it's a community-driven standard, let's go and ask the community for feedback. And so we set up a feedback page and we invited pretty much anyone to contribute to the feedback. And we were literally inundated with suggestions and comments. And so we started going through the comments and suggestions, not only by entities that have already got certified systems, but entities that were looking at certifying their system, and general people interested in the crypto ecosystem. And so we started working through the feedback, and it was significant. And we had set dates to release version 8.2, which was the version that we were planning to release. But the feedback was so great from the community that we actually ended up in December of 2024 drawing a line in the sand to basically say, okay, let's just get the new standard out. It's fantastic. There's a lot of good stuff in there now, thanks to the community. And we called it version 9 because of the changes were so significant. And it wasn't just the general community, the crypto community, but we had people from outside the crypto community. Of course, we had CCSS auditors contributing as well. So it was basically a worldwide assistance by the crypto community.
Yeah, and I think that community-driven aspect is so important. And we will be asking, we already are asking for feedback for 9.0. So if you look on our socials, you'll be able to find links to be able to give further feedback as we continue to make improvements and tweaks. It is a very large standard, so obviously there are going to be little things we notice, small tweaks that we change as we go along, but this really couldn't be done without, first of all, this volunteer committee, and then also people in the industry and who care about crypto and security and making sure that private keys and key material stays private and secure. So it really has been an effort by a lot of different people to get to where we are today. So why don't we just get into some of the requirements? Does that sound good? Dirk, did you want to do anything else for intros?
I was just going to follow up with what you were saying there with just a big thank you to everybody as well, right? The members of the committee that are here on the call today, as well as those who couldn't make it today, but also to that community at large for all of their involvement. Just thanks, because that's what makes the CCSS, I think, so great.
I think it's also worthwhile throwing a thanks to some of the very original contributors all the way back in, I believe it was 2012, that got this ball rolling. Back then, it was contributors like BitGo, contributors like Armory X, which is a throwback just to say. A lot of these old, longstanding or no longer with us companies or projects, they banded together alongside C4 to get the ball rolling in this open format. And I'm so proud to see that this open format has persisted ever since 2012. Crypto security is a big problem, and the CCSS is a big standard, but it's because it's tackling a big problem very well.
Yep, and we all know that billions of dollars have been lost because of poor key management. So that's what we're all working on to stop happening. Let's make the space safer. All right, let's get into some requirements. So where do we want to start? Ron, do you want to start us off with isolation requirement, which is 1.05, what is it? .2.2 and .3.
That would be great. Thank you, Justin. So as we said throughout the call, we really took a deep dive in taking a look at the evolving security landscape of the industry, evaluating potential solutions, gathering and reviewing feedback. And one of the areas we really focused on was key material, specifically the need to really protect cryptographic keys used for signing, managing digital funds, all of those good things. So we added a new control 1.05 2.2. And what this control really emphasizes is isolating keys from your other system and application processes. The goal here is to really prevent unauthorized access or leakage of the key or key data. And why are we recommending isolation? Well, I think everybody on the call and everybody listening is very familiar with the growing threat of malware and malicious system processes, things that are disguised to look and do nasty things, but look like regular system processes, and then also unauthorized access attempts. So these attacks really target sensitive data like the keys themselves, making it a level 1 requirement. It's really a foundational security measure that everyone should prioritize. Building and enhancing on that, Control 1.052.3 enhances that isolation requirement by requiring compliance with FIPS 140 or an equivalent standard. And when we're talking about FIPS, we're talking about the Federal Information Processing Standard. This is a government-backed standard and framework where they put cryptographic modules and devices through rigorous testing and verification. So when you think about that government level grade of security, we've designated that level 3, right? Representing the highest level of security assurance within our framework. So you might be sitting there asking, how do you achieve this isolation? Some effective approaches would be using things like hardware security modules, HSMs, or purpose-built offline cryptographic key management and generation devices. Another option would be to use a TEE, a trusted execution environment. And you want to think of that as like a secure enclave where you're really processing those sensitive operations. And with these updates specifically, we're really reinforcing that foundation of key management and raising the bar for security. With that, I will hand it over to Jameson, who will walk you through some of the more additions and revisions we've incorporated.
Right. So I think we're going to talk about some of the controls around the actual key holders. So,
Do you want me to lead you in, Jameson, or are you good?
I think this was the 1.5.6 area, right?
Exactly.
And so, a number of the changes that we've made are just around ensuring that the people who are interacting with this sensitive key material understand the risks and understand the policies that you put in place in order to mitigate those risks. So we have define this key management training in 1.5.6, which basically says that anyone who is involved in the actual management and operations of key material, whatever type of key material that may be, needs to complete security training that is specific to handling that key material. That needs to be training that happens during onboarding, and then regularly as they are continuing to undertake those duties. And this is just important because what we've found, as we continue to increase the best practices around key management, is that generally speaking, the weakest link is no longer going to be in like the actual hardware storage of the keys, but rather often in the humans that are operating and have control over these keys. So it's important that we have strong and secure processes in place so that no type of, for example, phishing or other impersonation or man-in-the-middle attacks can happen because a key operator has been fooled in some way. And furthermore, we go on to describe in 1.5.7 that the actual responsibilities of the people who are in these key management roles need to be written down. They need to be understood and formally signed off by anyone who is, given this level of responsibility. And that just ensures that they understand what the various policies, procedures, and access controls around using the key material in order to prevent unauthorized access and use of it.
Yeah, I think it's so important when we say like, oh yeah, our team's got it. Well, who on your team? Have they been trained? What exactly happened? Rather than just kind of loosely stating or claiming that you've done something. This is very specific in terms of what the training has been, and then the acknowledgement of who is doing what. I think that puts more accountability on people. I think this is a really important addition to the standard. Did anyone else want to add anything about the key management training or key management responsibilities requirements that Jameson was just talking about?
I think this one is important because we've heard stories in the industry where somebody is offboarded with that knowledge, that lives in their head, and it's been 2 or 3 years, and they go back to try to get the key material or the password to the key material, or they can't locate the key material. And just due to the length of time, funds have been lost due to this failure. So this control is very important in my opinion.
Michael, were you going to jump in and say something?
No, Ron took the words out of my mouth.
All right, perfect. We're all on the same page then. That's great. Okay, let's talk a little bit about 2.04, so annual inventory review. Did you want to get into that, Dirk?
Yeah, sure. And this is fairly brief, right? We've, as part of the standard has always been around the things like key compromise protocol and maintaining keys, storing keys. But one of the things that was kind of pointed out to us that was a little bit of a vacuum was in just maintaining key inventories in the first place. And so new requirement in the standard kind of heading off that section on key compromise protocols and stuff is around maintaining that. It's a level 1. Again, it's just as considered kind of a foundational sort of control. But right in line with what both Jameson and Ron were talking about, you have an environment where you have lots of keys. You're running an exchange or a custody program, and you've got like lots and lots of keys out there. And again, you lose track of how a key is being used, what a key is for, where the backups of that key are being stored, and suddenly you've lost a lot of funds. And we've absolutely seen that sort of thing happening as well. So one of the new changes is just the requirement that entities maintain inventories of those keys.
Yeah, and I think too, we say in the requirement at least annually, but you'll see later on that we've actually introduced a risk management component to the standard now, where if you believe that the keys, the critical key material has a high rotation, or basically there are a lot of new keys generated or retired or revoked, that you should do a risk assessment in order to work out the frequency of reviewing your inventory. So we say here, obviously, just at least, but if there's a high turnover of your key inventory, then just do a risk assessment to work out what the frequency should be. It might be end up being quarterly or biannually as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we've talked about this before, but a lot of these, majority of the requirements come from examples, real life examples, case studies, things that have happened in the past that are informing the decision to include this in the standard. And so I know that Ron, Michael, when you guys were first working on this, you were really looking at what some of the hacks that happened, like why did they take place? Did they manage their keys? Was there an inventory? All of this stuff. And so it was built into the standard, knowing that that was not always happening. And even though it's been a part of the standard, it's been reiterated on, we've got these additions to it. It did, you know, having this key inventory of sorts has been important the whole time. Yet, even though it's been in the standard for a decade in one way or another, we still, like with Prime Trust recently, saw something like this happen again, where they weren't sure where a key was. They didn't know that they had this wallet. And so it kind of keeps happening. And that's why we're here, to try to make these, I don't know, awful situations get better and have it stop being such a thorn in the side of this community. Okay, anything else we want to get to when we're discussing the key inventory and having it be annual? No? Okay. Should we get into smart contracts a little bit, which is a pretty big new addition? I don't know how detailed we want to get into it, but let's at least talk about what it is and how we added it. Jameson, do you want to get started on this, or does anyone else want to jump in? Michael?
I can have a chat about it, because we had another CCSS auditor, Will from Helborn. He helped us with these smart contract requirements, which is just showing basically the transparency and the fact that, you know, this is just not the steering committee writing these requirements. So thanks a lot, Will, for helping us out here.
And if I can jump in, he's going to be joining us in a couple weeks on a different stream to talk about his process as well. So we'll hear it from him too in a couple weeks, but go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did is we actually identified that there was 4 issues around smart contracts that we saw currently. And one of them was that a lot of the time smart contracts aren't audited. And so we put in a requirement whereby smart contracts that are going to be used by the stakeholders, you know, we use the term mainnet, but, you know, it's basically any environment where smart contracts are used by the stakeholders in, like, quote, production. And so we've required now that smart contracts are audited before they're deployed to this, quote, production or the mainnet. And another situation we found that is actually quite prevalent is that a version of the smart contract code will be audited, say version 1 of the smart contract code, and then the platform or the entities, they decided that they want to make a change to the smart contract code, and, you know, it's just a little minor change, it's not that bad, and they don't get it audited, and it gets deployed. That version 1.1 gets deployed to the mainnet, and it hasn't been audited. And then the audit report for version 1 is released. And so what it does is it actually provides a confusing situation where the audit report that's currently online is actually referring to a version of the smart contract code that has not been audited. And so that's a false sense of security. But at the same time, in our scenario here, version 1.1 actually introduced a major vulnerability, and resulting in the platform getting hacked via the smart contract. And, you know, obviously the blame flows around here. They're blaming the smart contract auditors, and the smart contract auditors are going, wait a minute, you know, this version that's been put up is not the version we audited. It shows also too that the entity creating the smart contract code really doesn't have secure processes to actually work out, well, actually this change is quite an important change. And the risk is so high that we need to have another audit done, or at least a delta audit, right? Just audit that change itself. So that was another major one. So what we did with the requirements too is we enhanced the requirements around smart contracts, in that the version of the smart contract that is in the mainnet used by the stakeholders, there is an associated smart contract audit report. Another requirement we put in, so there's 3 smart contract auditing requirements, but it's addressing 4 vulnerabilities or threats that we see. And another threat that we saw is that the audit reports actually aren't publicly available, or they're not available to the stakeholders. So we've got a requirement where we actually say the smart contract audit reports need to be made available to the stakeholders. And finally, the last requirement, which is quite important, is that we pretty much say you need to address the vulnerabilities that have been identified in the smart contract audit report to at least start from medium severity to high. Obviously, this depends on what you interpret as medium severity, high severity, critical severity, and so forth. But it's a start. We've just introduced these new requirements. There will be some crafting. Hopefully, we'll get some feedback from the crypto ecosystem and enhance them even further. But we believe these 3 new requirements will actually go a long way to securing smart contracts a little bit more.
I really like those additions to the standard, Mark, because one thing that we have seen in the industry over the last couple of years are thefts from systems where they say, oh, but look, we do have an audit. Look, we got audited last year, but the version of code that is running now, it has changed. It's evolved, and it is no longer matching what was audited last year. This requirement makes sure that the version that is running has an audit 1-to-1, and that is so important.
So I think it's worth noting the sort of overarching theme of the 2.1 section for security tests and audits is basically to fill in a lot of the gaps for what the CCSS doesn't do. What is the point of
does now.
Yeah, version 8.1 and earlier didn't do. But also it's like, what is really the point of the CCSS? It's really about key management. So we're focusing on the private key material, the generation, the usage, the storage, and potentially destruction or deletion or rotation of this sensitive data. Now, any given system that is incorporating private key material is probably going to be far more complex than simply the interactions with that private key material. And so that's what a lot of this section is about, which is basically that you need to be following all of the industry standard best practices for cybersecurity in general. And so, that's what really like the first section, 2.1.1 is about, following a lot of those standards, getting an external audit of your entire system to make sure you don't have some gaping holes elsewhere that could somehow lead to key leaks, loss, so on and so forth. And then this, the smart contract stuff, we had a lot of discussions about this, and we had discussions about, should we get into the business of trying to set standards for smart contracts. And essentially it boiled down to, this is way too big of a problem, too complex, and there's already a whole separate industry that has been built up around smart contract auditing. So, we should basically plug that in to the standard here, make sure that people are following the standards that have been put in place for smart contracts on various systems. And also, there's no way for us to possibly keep up with the accelerating growth of smart contracts and all the different networks and platforms that are emerging, and all of the different standards and best practices that are going along with those.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that comes out of this that is, precisely what Jameson was talking about there, and how we built all of this, and that focus on the key management, key operations, right? We're not trying to reboil the ocean. There are plenty of other security standards out there that address all of the broad general controls that need to be in place for business operations and technology operations. But I think one of the things is really important to remember, because people sometimes have kind of a knee-jerk reaction to some of the specificity of the CCSS requirements, and especially at the higher levels, how kind of restrictive they are. We have to remember that we're talking about an environment where once the asset's gone, it's gone. right? This isn't your credit card can be, your credit card number can be changed, and the bank can, put assets back into your, bank account, or we're dealing with blockchain-based assets here. And once something is stolen, it's stolen. Once something is lost, it's lost. And so that's why, we talk about things like having the version of the assessment of the smart contract match the version of the code that's out there. Most all of the other standards, PCI, ISO, NIST, are going to talk about having, assessments done. And then they're going to have a process by which you're supposed to implement the more minor changes and stuff. But they allow for there to be time before the next assessment is done. If your smart contract has a hole introduced into it, you lose all of your money. You lose it all today, and you lose it forever. So that's kind of why some of these things feel a little bit more strict than perhaps an auditor for some of the other standards is used to.
Great points, Derek. Hearing you speak about some of these changes, and actually in hearing Jameson speak before you, reminded me of a couple other sweeping changes across the entire standard that we haven't mentioned yet. And it's all related to terminology. A lot of terms have been replaced with other terms that are more specific. One great example of a sweeping change across the whole standard is the words key material. If you've worked with private keys in any capacity before, you probably already know that there is the seed, there is the actual private key, there is the XPriv, there is the mnemonic. There are a variety of different layers depending on what your system does. And referring to all of these as just the private key, it wasn't as specific as it could be. So one sweeping change across the entire standard is the new term key material. This follows industry practices in cryptography to refer to this type of data, this private data that makes up a private key or a deterministic seed from which private keys are derived, et cetera, et cetera. Key material is now the word used across the standard. And I think it not only is much more specific, but it also aligns with industry best practices. Can we think of any other terminology changes?
Let's talk-
There's also, we've replaced multi-signature mechanism with, so based on the other thing too, obviously we've got support for now in version 9 is support for single signer wallets or mechanisms. So before version 9, CCSS at level 2 and 3 only supported multi-signature wallets. And with the feedback that we received from the community was, well, what about hot wallets? What about exchanges that have architectures where they rely on hot wallets to speed up the transactions? And so we came back and we thought, well, you could argue it's not really best practice to have a single signature wallet. And so, but we thought, well, we don't want to restrict the use of CCSS because your architecture's got hot wallets in it, single signer hot wallets. So what we did is we introduced a new requirement where, well, we enhanced an existing requirement where we basically said, if you are using a wallet that only requires a single signer, then consider these criteria. So a lot of the criteria that we've suggested is around risk and around the fact that executive management are aware of the risks of introducing this type of architecture into the platform. So what we did there is then, okay, so now we support single signature wallets. And then we thought, well, this new version, we're trying to future-proof the standard. So a lot of the requirements, and as Michael said, around the term key material replacing what we had in version 8.1 is about future-proofing the requirement. For example, when I audited Fireblocks, I was using version 8.1, and they obviously, it's publicly known they use MPC. So the way the CCSS was currently worded at the time, it talked about private keys. And so what we had to do is to say, well, you know, an MPC, the shards, are they considered individual private keys and so forth? So this is where we're now changing the wording, where we say key material. We don't say private keys or anything like that now. We say key material. So that future-proofs the requirement. The other one we did was the multi-signer or single signer. So we removed signature. We removed, you know, the terms wallet. We try and avoid the wallet as much as we can. We haven't completely removed it, but we're getting there. So single signer is now part of CCSS. So that's, you know, the old terms that signal signature, and also multi-signer. So you won't see the term signature too much. You'll see it in digital signatures, but in terms of the signing of the transactions for the wallets and so forth, we use signer instead. And again, lastly, it's just basically there to future-proof the requirements.
I think something, if I can just jump in, something you said, Mark, and then also Jameson, relates to how much work goes into actually making these little tweaks, and how it might seem like a small thing, but it's massive. The discussions, as Jameson, you alluded to, about smart contracts, it wasn't just like a quick add. This was a really long discussion, and these little these little word choices actually have a lot of eyeballs on them and a lot of considerations before they're added or moved. So these language terms, you know, go throughout the entire standard, and I think they make a really big difference. So just having been on the back end and seeing you guys with these discussions, I think it just shows like how important the standard is and how valuable it is to everyone that donates their time to improve it for the, you know, ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, we also have to think adversarially about the wording and definitions of terms, because if we're not precise enough, if we use language that's too vague, that can create loopholes for people to be technically following the standard, but still be doing stupid stuff.
And the opposite is also true. If it is too specific, that means the CCSS is now prescribing the only way that people can ever deal with private keys. And there are so many different applications out there, each of them needing to deal with things in a different way. Finding that balance between not too specific but not too vague was actually quite challenging. And I think the hurdles that this committee jumped through to get 9.0 out can only be rivaled by, I think it was version 3 of the CCSS that needed to take into account Ethereum keys, and the fact that a Ethereum key is a single account, whereas with Bitcoin you can have multiple keys all in the same account. Account doesn't really exist in Bitcoin, but wordsmithing the standard back in the day to support Ethereum took a Herculean effort. And what this committee did with this version 9.0 rivals that for sure. One of the other changes that are that's notable between 8.1 and 9.0 relates to monitoring, log monitoring. Already there was a section, I think it was 2.02, that has a lot of different things about log monitoring, making sure that, well, first off, your application is keeping logs of important things that are changing. Also, those logs are being shipped off somewhere else, so that if your system gets nuked, you at least have a copy of what happened somewhere else to analyze and understand what went wrong. And also those logs are being monitored by someone, either a system or an intern who sees something important and rings the alarm bell saying, hey, something bad happened. All these things were in 8.1, but 9.0 has now enhanced the logging section with a new requirement, 2.02.4, and that is blockchain state monitoring. This was another gap in what 8.1 covered. If you're familiar with how blockchains work under the hood, you may be familiar with forks. Everything's marching along in one direction, and then there could be another fork which could rewrite some history. If some history is being rewritten, maybe some deposits into an exchange are being undone, or maybe some withdrawals from an exchange are being undone. It's important to not only monitor the logs, but also to monitor the state of the blockchain that that you're dealing with, or the state of the multiple blockchains if your system is dealing with multiple blockchains. Excuse me, depending on the particular blockchains your system is using, dealing with those state and monitoring for those large state changes, it could be absolutely important. So now this new control 2.02.4, this new control requires systems that are dealing with chains that need monitoring to have that type of monitoring in place. This goes a long way to enhancing the security of the assets controlled on that blockchain. There's also some interesting things that were changed related to governance and risk. Mark, you want to cover that one?
No problem. So we've got a brand new aspect that we introduced in version 9, which is the governance and risk. So version 8.2 really didn't address, it was more technical. It didn't really address the governance processes that should be included in an information security standard. So we introduced this aspect. There'll be more added over time. But initially what we put in here is the 3 things that we consider to be the most important in terms of threat vectors. So we put in the governance piece. So this is where the executive team actually acknowledges the fact that they're responsible for the security of the platform or the information system. So there we need to see that executive management are aware of the risks of introducing a signal signer mechanism. They're aware of the risks of the fact that they're not vetting their key custodians properly and so forth. And a risk plan is introduced where they can manage the risk. So it's all about accountability and responsibility at the highest levels, because the executive team, they're there to actually drive the strategy and the vision of the platform going forward, the business. So there we just wanted to make sure that executive management were aware of the risks of some of the architectures involved in their business, so to speak. One of the other ones that we did, and we talked about it quite a bit, is the risk management component. So what you'll see in version 9 is that a few of the requirements actually refer to a specific aspect control in this aspect called risk management. So therefore, if you're dealing with frequencies and so forth, to consider the risk of the processes that you're doing and applying the correct security control. So we've got a risk management piece in there and a threat modeling piece in there as well. We believe these are quite important to actually have. A lot of information security standards and methodologies and so forth, they pretty much say define risk first, right? What are the threats to your systems? And obviously, once you identify the threats, you work out the risks, and then you apply the appropriate controls and so forth. So we introduced that. And the final key component we introduced in the governance and risk aspect is service provider management. We all know, even from the Web 2 space, that service providers can cause hell on earth if they have access to an entity's platform and systems, and the entity is not monitoring their service providers to make sure they actually are taking security seriously and treating their credentials with secure controls. So those are the 3 main requirements that we've put into the governance and risk, but we will be adding more.
Yeah, Dirk, did you have anything you wanted to add about the governance and risk? And then I think, Michael, you'll talk about some other aspect as well that we want to get to. But Dirk, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just one of those super logical progressions that builds off of what we were talking about earlier, just trying to make the standard more applicable, more usable, and more valuable for everybody.
I think it is worth noting that this is not just a theoretical thing. I think we've seen at least one, possibly multiple attacks last year in which multi-signer systems like treasuries were actually taken over by attackers. and they basically were able to, get the multi-signer system to change who owned the keys to the system so that they could then steal all the money.
Yeah. We also just realized there's another piece to the standard that we wanted to bring up. And I think one of the interesting pieces is the standard's so large and it was, big before, and then looking between the two of them and trying to make sure that everyone understands the differences. I think also in our heads, switching back and forth, if you don't have it right in front of you to look at and reference, it's like, it feels really big because it is. But I think one other thing that we wanted to talk about was the physical security piece and what that the additions that we included into 9.0 and how that changed a little bit. So I wanted to just point out that previously in 1.01.3.2, the key seed generation process needed to be documented, and it included a detailed run book that showed steps and had to be signed off. But this has been added to, and it is quite a bit longer at this point. Michael, are you comfortable getting into some of this?
Yeah, for sure. So when you're creating your seed, there are a variety of things you need to do to make sure that the seed is created confidentially. You don't want to do it in front of a camera. You don't want to do it in front of a bunch of other people. You want to do it in a secure place using offline materials, wherever possible, to minimize the chance of this leaking. In the previous version of the standard, in 8.1, it outlined a number of controls that you need to follow to make sure that you do this securely. But 9.0 enhances it by adding a requirement for a run book. This run book lists all of the steps that will be completed before the key generation ceremony begins. And this run book then also serves as documentation for what did happen. This allows anybody else to audit and understand what happened when the key was being created. It also makes it more repeatable as well. If your organization needs to create another key, you can refer to that same run book to follow each of the steps.
Yeah. And go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, the enhancement, like Michael said, the enhancement, we also considered the physical security controls as well now. So CCSS is now broadening into the physical side of information security controls as well. So you'll see in that requirement, there's things such as ensuring that there's no cameras pointing to the area where you're conducting key ceremonies, that you check prior to this to really make sure that there is no microphones or anything that could record conversations. And an interesting thing is even after we released version 9 with this new requirement, I'm sure the listeners saw that piece about Siri on iPhones sometimes triggering and automatically recording or listening to conversations, which they weren't even told to do. Siri wasn't actually even activated, but it activated itself and was on listen mode. Now, see, this is related to a physical security in that maybe you remove all your mobile phones from the area where you're conducting a key ceremony just for this specific reason as well. So things like mobile phones should be not brought into the key ceremony area. That, again, locked doors. Are you using locked doors for the key ceremony area? Can the general public just wander in when you're doing these things and disturb the process and so forth? Where are the key materials stored? You might be using HSM keys. So are they in a locked safe or a locked cabinet? There's a whole raft of physical considerations, but what we did initially to enhance this requirement is we provided some ideas, but obviously, you can work on that and add to it, to your own environment. And a key thing too there, like Michael suggested, is that there's a pre-checklist and a recording of the key ceremony. And that pre-checklist might include things, and we mentioned this in the requirements, such as ensuring that all the computers and devices that you're using in the key ceremony have been checked to ensure that there's been patches applied, there's updates, the devices are still hardened well. they haven't been accessed without authorization and so forth. So you could create a checklist, pre-run checklist, pre-flight checklist of all these things that you need to ensure that the entire physical environment is as protected as it should be.
You said one word there, Mark, and I don't want the audience to misunderstand. You said recording of the key generation process. What I'm sure you meant was there is a documented process that records what happened, but there is no video that records the actual key generation process. That would, of course, violate the confidentiality of the key that was just generated. That nuance is quite important.
Oh, and also the voice recording as well. So with the Siri basically recording a conversation unauthorized. So yes, but no, you're right. Definitely these nuances are a real gotcha sometimes.
All microphones, all cameras, all antennas out of the room when you're performing the ceremony. Listening to all these changes that we've discussed over the last almost an hour now, while we've covered most of the changes, there are still a lot more smaller changes that that were made that we won't have time to cover today. And as a living, breathing standard that is trying to standardize security for an industry that moves at breakneck speed, this version 9.0 is not going to be the last either. Dirk, as the chair of our committee, what's next? How are we going to evolve to the next one and make sure that this security standard continues to either keep up with or go ahead of the breakneck speeds that the crypto industry is evolving at?
Yeah, no, some of this was kind of alluded to when we started here, but we're actually in the midst of a 90-day review period right now. So the standard was published on December 17th, I think. And we're, into a 90-day review period for stakeholders to provide feedback on. That feedback specifically really kind of focused on issues or errors or anything like that in the current draft of the standard. But the moment that's locked down, right, we just go back into doing what we've been doing, which is continuing to take stakeholder feedback, continuing to monitor what's going on in the industry, reviewing we're all security professionals and audit professionals here. We are always reading and reviewing and digging into the compromises and the breaches and understanding, what the attack vectors were and, the process by which those occurred. So we can make sure that they're being addressed. And we will just keep on doing that. For those entities that are certified or looking at getting certified, so if you were certified or in the process of being audited, had a letter of intent, and were in the process of starting an audit when the standard was released, then you can continue to be audited under the existing version of the standard for the next 2 years. And that's because any standard like this, because of the changes, right, we know that there are going to be environments that have to retool things and have to revisit things in order to meet some of the new requirements. We're trying to the real goal of everything that we do at C4, not just with the CCSS, is to improve the industry and improve the environment in the ecosystem. So that's what we're pushing for, not making people not be able to meet their certification or the standard when they need to. So there is that kind of process for migration and grandfathering in the existing certifications. There's also a process in place for auditors. If you're a CCSS auditor, we have kind of a jump quiz that takes you to version 9. So you don't have to retest for the whole thing. You can take this shorter quiz that shows that you understand the major changes and how they impact doing an audit. So that will get you your version 9 CCSSA. But those are distinct. If you don't have the version 9, you can't do a version 9 audit. So so that's something that if you are an auditor, you want to get out there and take. What am I missing? Mark, Jess? I mean, I think those are the key kind of next steps things, operationally and logistically.
Yeah, before I close this out, anything that we didn't cover that anyone wants to jump in either about what Dirk said or the standard in general? I know we're going to need to do a follow-up where we discuss the standard further, but for now, anything else? Ron, did you want to say anything else? Jameson, Mark, Michael?
When is that stakeholder call again, Dirk?
Yep, I'm gonna go through that all as I'm closing us out. So I'll get into that. So our advocacy group, we've got a CCSSA advocacy group where auditors are able to join. They discuss the standard, make comments. That's how the smart contract requirements that we talked about earlier that Mark and Jameson got into actually developed with one of the auditors who gave us a lot of feedback, and it was awesome. But so on January 29th, so a little less than 2 weeks at 2 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to have our advocacy group and a couple of our steering committee members join us for a follow-up video to talk more about the changes that have happened in the standard and what we can look forward to. And I think the takeaway from this, in addition to all of the bits and pieces that we've discussed today, is that this committee and C4 as a whole really is working together to create this healthier crypto ecosystem. And so we're requesting feedback on this latest version, 9.0. We're sure that it'll be updated and changed because as the crypto community, crypto ecosystem evolves, the CCSS has and will continue to evolve alongside us. So we really, really hope that you will join us in this, I think, extremely important mission to continue to keep the standard updated as the industry and cryptocurrency evolves as well. So I am so grateful to this amazing steering committee. You guys are incredible. So much of this work behind the scenes. I mean, people watching don't know, but we were meeting every single week. Everyone had homework. There was a lot going on, incorporating all of the stakeholder feedback, the amount of information and spreadsheets and tabs. It was, explosive, but it was amazing. And so we got here and we'll continue to push forward. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And for all of those watching, thank you for joining and please participate. Let's work together on this community-driven standard.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all.
Thank you.
All right. Take care,
Bye.
everyone. Okay.
Huh.